Hello, welcome to your Fat Wallet podcast. I am Jaime Elizondo from Real Wealth Ranching. Today I want to talk to you about stocking rate and carrying capacity. Why most ranchers confuse these two very important measurements. If there's one conversation I have more than almost any other with ranchers, whether I'm standing in a pasture, teaching a class, or answering a message late at night, it is this one. Jim, I think I'm stocked right, but I'm not sure. Sometimes they say it confidently, sometimes they whisper it like a confession, and sometimes they say it after a bad season, a dry spell, or a winter that cost them more hay than they care to admit. Almost every time, when we start peeling back the layers, the real issue isn't grass. It isn't how much rain you get on average. It isn't genetics. It isn't even management, at least not in the way most people think. It's confusion. Confusion between stocking rate and carrying capacity. Two terms that sound familiar. They sound similar. Two terms that get used interchangeably. Two terms that are taught as if they're fixed, measurable, scientific truths. And yet, confusing them is one of the fastest ways to overgraze good pasture, underutilize great land, burn out ranchers, waste money on hay, and never quite trust your own decisions. Today, I want to slow this conversation down, not to make it more complicated, but to finally make it clear. And let me say this plainly. You can be within carrying capacity and still be losing money. You can be overstocked and still improve your land. You can follow the textbook and still feel like you're always behind. And it's not because you're doing something wrong. It's because more ranchers were taught these concepts in isolation, without context, without biology, without real world feedback. And once a misunderstanding gets locked in early, it quietly shapes every decision you make for years. That's why this block matters. Because when you finally understand the difference between stocking rate and carrying capacity, not just academically, but practically, you stop guessing. And ranching gets a whole lot clearer. So let's start with the classic definition. Carrying capacity is usually taught as the maximum number of livestock a piece of land can support without degrading. Sounds reasonable, right? And then comes the math. Acres versus by times average forest production minus utilization factor minus wildlife consumption minus drought buffer, all that divided by animal unit months. On paper, it looks scientific. In practice, it often becomes a ceiling, a mental limit that ranchers are afraid to cross. I have met countless ranchers who say things like, this land can only handle so many cows. I'd love to run more, but I don't want to overgraze. It's just the carrying capacity here. And I understand why they say these things. Because when you're taught that carrying capacity is fixed, exceeding it feels reckless. But here's the truth most people never hear. Carrying capacity is not fixed. It is not a number. It is a result. And results change when management changes. You see, the stocking rate is the lever you control. Now, Let's talk about it. Stocking rate is simply how many animals do you choose to run on a given area for a given time. That's it. No judgment, no morality, no good or bad, just your decision. And here is the key distinction most people miss. Stocking rate is a management choice, while carrying capacity is a biological outcome. One is proactive, the other is reactive. One is adjustable daily, the other reflects what your land has become over time. When ranchers confuse the two, they often treat carrying capacity like a rule and stocking rate like a risk. My friends, that is backwards. And this confusion persists. Why? Why is it so widespread? Because most education separates grazing from soil, separates animals from plants, and separates short-term use from long-term response. And because many recommendations are built around continuous or selective grazing, even when they claim otherwise, right? You see, when animals are allowed to selectively graze, they repeatedly hit the same plants. They avoid mature material and they keep the regrowth in a constant state of stress. I've seen this all my life. In that system, carrying capacity does feel fixed because the land never gets a chance to change. But when grazing becomes intentional, non-selective, and recovery-driven, something remarkable happens. The land responds. Now, let me share a pattern I've seen over and over again, hundreds of times. A rancher calls me and says, Jim, I want to increase my stocking rate, but I don't think my land can handle it. So we walked and observed the pasture together. What do we usually find? Patchy grazing, overgrazed plants next to untouched mature grass, bare ground right beside rank forage, soil that's hard, tight, and lifeless. Then I ask, how long does these plants rest before they're grazed again? And the answer is almost always, I'm not sure. They're just kind of always being grazed first. My friends, that's not a carrying capacity problem, that's a recovery problem. Because carrying capacity is created, not discovered. So this is one of the most important mindset shifts you need to make. You don't find your carrying capacity, you build it. On land that is allowed to fully recover, allowed to mature at times, allowed to stockpile energy reserves, and allowed to feed soil biology. Then it will not behave the same as land that is constantly skimmed. And over time, roots grow deeper, organic matter increases, water infiltration and holding capacity improves, forage production rises, and seasonal resilience increases. And guess what changes with this? You guessed, carrying capacity. Not because you forced it, but because biology responded. So many ranchers pride themselves on being conservatively stocked, but this often backfires. I do respect the intention behind that, but here's the uncomfortable truth. Understocking can be just as damaging as overstocking when it's paired with selective grazing. Why? Because animals keep regrazing the best plants. Mature material oxidizes or rots, and shades regrowth. Soil biology stays underfed, and plant diversity declines. The land never gets fully used and never fully recovers, so carrying capacity stagnates. And the rancher says, see, this land just can't do more, when in reality it was never given the chance. You see, stocking rate without recovery is pressure, only pressure. And this is where many systems fail. They focus on animal numbers, paddock size and paddock numbers, and moves per day. But they ignore recovery time. And let me be clear, stocking rate without adequate recovery is just pressure. Stocking rate with recovery becomes regeneration. And you can run a high stocking rate for a short time and improve the land if recovery is honored. Or you can run a low stocking rate continuously and degrade the land if recovery is ignored. This is why blanket recommendations never work. Now, ranching may feel stressful when these two are confused. When stocking rate and carrying capacity are blurred together, ranchers live in constant fear, fear of running out of grass, fear of drought, fear of making the wrong call, fear of being judged. Every decision feels heavy. But when you separate them clearly, stocking rate becomes a tool and carrying capacity becomes feedback. You stop asking, can my land handle this? And start asking, what is my land telling me right now? That shift alone changes everything. Now let's look at how the Total Grazing Academy reframes the conversation. Inside the Total Grazing Academy, we don't start with numbers. We start with plant recovery, residuals, animal behavior and performance, soil response. We teach ranchers to adjust their stocking rate dynamically, to read the land response honestly, to use stockpiling strategically, and to build carrying capacity over time. Not through complexity, but through clarity. Because the goal isn't to run just to run more cows. The goal is to run the right number at the right time and for the right reason. And sleep well at night, knowing why. This isn't luck, and it isn't something unique to my land. It is a repeatable system, one that can be learned, applied, and refined over time. Here is a simple analogy. Stocking rate is how hard you press on the gas pedal. Carrying capacity is how strong the engine becomes over time. Pressing harder doesn't break a strong engine, and pressing lightly does not fix a weak one. What matters is how the system responds and whether you're paying attention. And now let's talk about money. When ranchers confuse these two, they buy hay too early, they sell animals too late, they miss opportunities to stockpile, they leave forage unused, and they carry unnecessary stress. But when they understand the difference, then they trust their decisions. They plan ahead calmly, they respond instead of react, and they lower costs naturally. Clarity creates profit. Not spreadsheets, not apps, not constant tweaking, just understanding. So the most common mistake isn't overstocking. It's locking in a stocking rate based on past carrying capacity and never revisiting it. You see, land is dynamic, and your management should be too. Whenever I'm working with someone new, I ask, are you managing for today's grass or for next year's grass? If the answer is only today, carrying capacity will always feel limited. But if the answer includes tomorrow, next season, and next decade, everything changes. You see, ranching was never meant to be this confusing. Our parents didn't have these terms. They observed grass height, animal behavior, and seasonal patterns. Somehow, along the way, we replaced observation with abstraction. The Total Grazing Academy is about bringing observation back. Okay, if you take nothing else from this blog, take this. Stocking rate is your decision, while carrying capacity is your land's response to your decisions. Confusing these two keeps ranchers stuck. When you separate them clearly, ranching becomes calmer, more predictable, more resilient, and more profitable. And most important, more enjoyable. If you're ready to stop guessing, stop reacting, and start ranching with clarity, I invite you to join us inside the Total Grazing Academy. Because ranching doesn't have to be complicated to be successful. It just has to make sense. www.rwranching.com/waitlist as one word. May God bless you all.